Hello, and welcome to Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu. The Sharjah Art Foundation is an advocate, catalyst, and producer of contemporary art within the Emirate of Sharjah and the surrounding region. In dialogue with the international arts community, the Foundation advances an experimental and wide-ranging programmatic model that supports the production and presentation of contemporary art, preserves and celebrates the distinct culture of the region, and encourages a shared understanding of the transformational role of art. Organized by the Foundation, Sharjah Biennial's 16th edition, SB16, convenes under the title To Carry, a multivocal and open-ended proposition, exploring the ever-expanding questions of what it means to carry and how to carry it. SB16 is an invitation to encounter the different formations and positions of the 5 curators, as well as the constellation of resonances they have gathered. Curated by Aliyah Swastika, Amal, Khalaf, Megan Tamati Quinnell, Natasha Jin, and Zainab Oz, the biennial unveiled more than 650 works by nearly 200 participants, including more than 200 new commissions. The biennial was launched on February 6, 2025, and will continue through June 15, 2025. During this exclusive capsule season, I'll engage in dialogue and discourse with artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial who are presenting new commissions. Throughout the series, you'll hear from artists across the globe, from Australia and Kenya to London and Nigeria and more. You'll hear us discuss a wide range of topics, from each artist's practice to their reflections on our society and the questions they investigate through their work. Please join me as I share these dynamic conversations with you, exploring the ins and outs and inner worlds of artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial with their newly commissioned works. Let's go! On this episode, I'm joined by Julian Knxx as we discuss his newly commissioned work presented for the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial, elucidated through the curatorial theme To Carry, asking questions such as, what does it mean to carry a home, a history, a language, a legacy, and a lineage? Julian Knxx's work merges his poetic practice with films and performance. He engages in a form of existential inquiry that at once seeks to find ways of expressing the ineffable realities of human experiences while examining the structures through which we live. In casting his own practice as a living archive, or a history from below, Julian Knxx draws on West African traditions of oral history to reframe how we construct both local and global perspectives. He does this through a body of work that challenges fixed ideas of identity and unravels linear Western historical and social political narratives, attempting to reconcile how it feels to exist primarily in liminal spaces. In this episode, Julian reflects on his transition from poetry to incorporating film and performance in his artistic practice. He shares how influences from his West African heritage and personal experiences led him to explore new mediums that could encapsulate his narratives more holistically. He delves into his project for the Sharjah Biennial 16, inspired by a dancer who performed a ritual dance reflecting on her grandmother. Julian emphasizes the themes of memory, spirituality, and the African diaspora, and discusses the broader ideas of Black imagination and carrying histories. He also touches on the impact of Black intellectual thinkers and literary influences on his work. Let's dive into my next episode with Julian Knxx.
Hi, my name is Julian Knxx. I'm a poet and a visual artist.
Julian Knxx, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today, to learning a little bit more about your practice and sharing it with the audience. let's jump right in. We did a short recording in Sharjah during the opening week of the Sharjah Biennial 16, and it's been about a month or so since that time. We're catching up now to continue that conversation. And I'd like to jump in and talk a bit about your work as a poet, which you mentioned, and the way that you've moved your practice into film and performance. First question, can you speak about your artistic practice when you made a choice to move from poetry and spoken word to more film-based and performance-based work? What were some of the things that initially led you to that transition and to making that change?
I think it was for me just thinking about how can I push my practice? How can I have a practice that's all encompassing with my experience of being West African, being Sierra Leonean? And I felt that the page wasn't enough. It was just thinking about how can I move what I'm doing to hold the conversations that I've had with my grandma, the experiences I've had back home, and how do I bring that into the practice of poetry? And I find that the page was restrictive. And maybe it's because I didn't have the skill set to, to bring all those experiences to the page. But I find that cinema or like moving image in this case was forgiving enough to hold some of the ideas that I was dealing with, and I wanted to layer in the experience of a poem. So I thought about moving image, but the same way you think about the printing press once upon a time was a technology. And I was just thinking about what is the sort of like contemporary technology now I can use to move my practice into a place that could hold all the disciplines that I want. And this I'm saying thinking about sound, thinking about the body, thinking about the words and color and texture. And I find that moving image allowed me to do that. And also the art world allowed me to experiment.
Yes. And what were some of those original experimentations when you were teasing out different ideas and trying different things? Were you pulling inspiration from different places?
Yeah, there are poets that I really like and really enjoy their works, but then I'd hear them read, and I'm like, that's not. When I read that poem and I really enjoyed it, but I had a different experience, and I hear them read, I'm like, wow, that's a very different outcome from what I wanted. As in the energy that I had when I was reading the poem, the musicality, because I feel like there's a Tina Cam's quote that said, she says, sound is physical. And I feel like for me, words are physical. So when something is said out loud, it hits you and it brings out an emotion. So when I'm reading a poem, the aim is for me to read it out loud so I can also hear it and feel it. I feel like that being an important part of it. Then I think I also like the idea of like when you think about performance, there is a form of like popular sort of spoken word performance that we do in London. But then I'm interested in the way we hold ceremonies back home or how we hold a wedding or a wake. The person who's speaking or holding the space would speak in a certain type of way that's not necessarily performative, even though they're performing, but there's a level of honesty to it, and they don't really care about the audience in that sense. It's about what they're doing and what they're saying, and they bring everyone along with them. And I wanted to marry those things, but I also want to marry the idea of, whilst I'm saying this poem, to break out into a song or break out into a movement or something. I just wanted to break out into these different forms because that's growing up, that's what I saw people doing when you hold space for people. I was invited to the literature festival, London Literature Festival at the South Bank, and I was offered this space. And the program at the time was like, got this space. His name is Debo, who I work with now. You've got this space. What do you want to do with it? Think about it. as part of the literature program. So then I was like, okay, cool. I've got this chapbook collection at the time. And I asked if we can have a projector in the room, ask for some lighting. So just to create a whole space. And unbeknown to me, it was like the first encounter of my practice. So I made this film that you'd come into the space and you'd watch the film. And then after the film finished, I then do this performance. And then after the performance, everyone was like, that was great. But then specifically, I remember people in the art world asking about the film. And we're like, what do you want to do with the film? Are you aware of so-and-so artists? And one of those artists being Theaster Gates at the time, another being Khalik Allah, and another one being John Comfra. And that sort of got me thinking about, okay, what now that I have this opportunity, what does this look like? How can I really sit down and play and push? That was like the first, thinking into this space.
Yeah. And as you described some of those major shifts and those moments in your practice that sort of marked this transition that you're the space that you occupy now within your artistic practice, what keeps you coming back to the mediums of film and performance?
Wow. I feel like what keeps me coming back to the medium of film and performance. I feel like performance for me, there's a way when you think about the body, like the body holds memory.
Yeah.
And I'm really invested in the idea of performance, like dancing and movement. I really enjoy it. I will sit down for hours just going through dance videos or my friends who are dancers going to their shows. There's something mesmerizing about, just like performance, how the body can tell a story without words, and how dance is a way it maps its own roots, it maps its own language, it's its own visual language. That is intriguing for me, and I'm invested in that. I'm also invested in what cinema does, in a sense, how it shifts people's perspective of what they think they know. When you think about Hollywood, when you think about the news, we're shown images of what we should, when we imagine other worlds, how we should imagine them, or when we imagine the other, what's happening to them. The news shows us these curated images of what's happening on the other side of the world or what's happening today. Those images are not in alignment with the people that are in those spaces. And I find that moving image helps in shaping the views of the world, news, or I guess Hollywood or films, you name it. I'm invested in that. I'm invested in what is blackness. How do you build new black worlds? How do you build the black imagination? What are the ways in which we can see ourselves celebrated and imagined otherwise? Yeah, that's what keeps drawing me back to that.
Your response makes me think about a few things. You ended there with the ideas of blackness, the black imagination, building new worlds. You referenced Jonna Comfra. You talked about Tina Campt. I thought about Echo Eshun and the Black Fantastic. And so that brings into the room these incredibly poignant and forward thinking Black intellectual thinkers, people who are thinking about visual culture in many different ways. We could talk about your work without the mention of any one other person, and they are not present. We haven't explicitly named them, but in mentioning them, it somehow feels resonant that we might speak about, what that is leading me to is thinking about, and your Sierra Leonean heritage, living currently in London, working across Europe and across the globe to the point of the Sharjah Biennial, which we'll get to shortly. I frame it all in that way to ask, could you bring more folks into the room with us as we engage in this dialogue?
Yeah, for me, there's two people that I can think of right now. So Amos Totola, he wrote a book called Palm Wine Drinkard. I remember reading it and just thinking, what did I just read? And it's one of those books that I keep going back to because I feel like what he did, I think he wrote this book in the 70s, but I remember reading it and just thinking, wow, what is this? Because it's not to spoil the book, but it's about this guy who basically had to go to the land of the dead to find his palm wine tapper, because the palm wine tapper is the only one that taps the palm wine the way he wants it to be tapped. And he has to go through so many obstacles. It's an epic story. And I just remembered it in a way, like he wrote this in a really sort of Nigerian pidgin English. And it's one of those books that at the time people didn't really understand what he was doing until T.S. Eliot was like, this guy's a genius. And then everyone else jumped in it. But I just remember that being a pivotal moment for me reading that book. And then the other one is Chinua Achebe. Yeah, Things Fall Apart. But also I read Chinua Achebe in school. So those were like the two at the time, people that were like, oh, they're doing something that resonate, that speaks to home and speaks deeply in my personhood, who I am. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, those are the two people. So you mentioned Echo Eshin. I spend a few time with him now because we're working on a few projects together. But this idea of Black Fantastic and how do we think about Blackness in the everyday, and thinking about being Black in a white world, and the ways in which being in existence in a white world, we have to imagine ourselves otherwise. And in doing so, we are fantastic. And I think that's really interesting. So it's not the idea of escaping, but it's the idea of fully being Black and fully being alive. And in so doing, you're fantastic. And I find that really interesting.
Let's take a moment and roll the tape back to the time when I was sitting at the opening of the Sharjah Biennial with Julian and talking about his work. It's the opening of the Sharjah Biennial 16. Julian, this is your first biennial.
Yes,
Isn't
it is. It is.
Does anything in this moment now feel different than other times in the past when you've presented your work to large groups, to an audience that is really steeped in art and culture?
Oh, it's a good question. I didn't think about that one. Yeah, I guess the context is different in a biennial because your work is being looked at in the context of the other works that are there. So that's different. And I guess location or geography changes. Yeah, I guess the perception also. Yeah, that felt different. But all in all, you make work and you don't make it for the audience. You make it because there's an urgency. There's something that you want to say. And the moment it leaves the studio or it leaves you, you've handed it over. So, yeah.
You spoke about the audience and handing it over and then thinking about making work for others versus making work for maybe potentially for yourself. The idea that there are times when an artist is making work maybe on a very personal level and or not considering the audience at all. Is just making a thing, putting it out there, getting it out into the world. And at that point, it's no longer in your hands. Is that how you usually work?
Yes, poetry is my way into art making. And I can't remember who said this, but there's this idea that a poem is never finished, it's abandoned. And for me, it's like the same approach. So you find a language to say what you want to say, and there comes a time when you have to let it go and hand it over to the world. Not necessarily abandon it, but almost you have to let it go and have its own life.
Yes.
So that's my approach to it.
For the folks who are listening in and may not have the opportunity to attend, but want to know more about what they might see, what the experience might be like of coming face to face with your film and your installation, what happens in this body of work? What takes place?
So I had a conversation with Amal, one of the curators, and the conversation was around what does it mean to carry, and what does that mean for you right now? And I guess the work that I'm showing is from another body of work called Chorus in Memory of Flight. And this particular section of it is an encounter that I had in Marseille with Dorothée when I was making Chorus in Memory Flight. And I went to 7 European cities, meeting the Black diaspora and asking for an offering. an offering from home, an offering that they've carried with them from their past or their history. And these offerings could be in any shape or form. It could be a song, it could be a dance, it could be a story. Dorothy offered this dance as her offering, and at the time, she just lost her grandmother. So we were in conversation about what does it mean for the body to carry memory of home. But then as a woman, there's this idea that she was saying that women carry two generations in them. So her grandmother once carried her, and now that her grandmother is in the afterlife, she's still carrying her there. So it's this idea that now that her grandmother's eyes are closed, she's closed in them. And so that was the sort of beginning of the conversation. And what does the body hold as a memory to have this dialogue? And how can dance map a ritual language into the afterlife? So that's where the conversation started. And that's the beginning of the sort of thinking that you're seeing in the work.
And just switching gears a little, we're here. It's the opening week of the Sharjah Biennial 16. And there's a lot of people attending. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of conversations that are being had about art. Have there been any conversations or any things that you've seen, heard, felt, or experienced in your time here so far that have been surprising or that have stood out to you? That could be artworks, that could be conversations, that could be
Yeah.
performances.
Someone came to me and said they cried after watching the work. And that was deeply moving because you don't make the work for that. The work spoke to him and he was being like vulnerable at the time.
And we're back. Julian and I will resume our conversation remotely. For the Sharjah Biennial 16, can you talk us through a little bit of what's happening in the work and how the new commission came to life?
Yeah, so the work in Sharjah is with an incredible dancer. Her name is Dor. She's an incredible artist I met in Marseille. And this was during when I was making the work, Chorus in Memory of Flight. The sort of premise behind the work was going to different European cities, work or collaborating with Black folks across these cities, just thinking about the ways in which they've come into those cities and what are the stories that they've brought with them, or what are the stories that they hold dearly, and what are the things that they are doing to hold space, to congregate, to sing songs, to speak with each other. So, in meeting individuals, I also met with choirs in each of these cities. But one of those people that's left a really deep impression in me was Dorothy. We met and I asked her about the offering. I told her about the project and I said, what offering would you like to offer towards the project? She's like, I'd like to do a dance reflection. In that sort of reflection, she was reflecting on her grandmother who just passed. And she said, I would like to do it at the edge of Marseille, looking across into Africa. And I was like, great, you let me know where and we'll come. And we met and she came through. She's got this silver dress that she wore in the piece. She wrapped it in her grandmother's fabric as an armor, a protective armor. And she was like, my grandmother just passed recently and she gave me this fabric and I used this fabric to wrap this silver dress that I'm gonna dance in. And it protects, whenever I wear this dress, I feel protected. But when I'm not wearing it, I use this fabric to protect it. And she just kept on going, telling me about her grandmother and her relationship with her. But what was also moving was how she uses dance as a way to map a spiritual language. Dance is like a ritual language. And I was really moved by it. And I was there with her for about an hour or so. And then she said, I have to catch my flight to Berlin. And then she left. But I remember just going through the rushes and just reflecting on that. You just met someone for the first time in a city that you're in for the first time, and they just giving you this sort of beautiful reflection. What is it that they're carrying at the time? And when Amal Khalaf reached out, one of the curators, for biennial. She was like, oh, the sort of theme or what I would like you to think on was to carry. And this work made the most sense to me. What is it that we're carrying? How we carry each other? How the that we're in carries all these histories. So I thought the work made sense. And just thinking about this idea of her being a woman, a mother, reflecting on her grandmother, and just this dialogue across both the land of the living and the land of the dead. And what does it mean to carry her Rwandan culture into Marseille and hold that in her own practice now, in a contemporary practice now? But also, there's this saying, this is quite cliche, that a woman carries two generations in her, I believe. So I find that profound that the grandmother is like two generation on and she's carrying two generations on. And there's that dialogue both in the physical and the spiritual. So that's how the work came about. And then I wrote this poem in reflection of that and send it to her. And she was very pleased with the poem. And then she then sent me this voice note in Kiruanda. She said a few things, but one of the things that she said that struck me was the way she said good night. It was almost like go safely into the night. So these are fragments that are held in the film, and the film is just reflecting on that. She's at the rim, she's at the edge of Marseille, mapping this sort of ritual language to her grandmother. It's a worked out hope that people will sit with and get that.
Yeah, wow, you've definitely said a lot there. And I think as somebody who's gotten to know you over a bit of time, and we've had lots of different conversations, and I know you have three daughters, and to be surrounded by young women, and I think the positionality of that as a man in the world to be raising young daughters is probably a very interesting experience. I started thinking about that as you were describing this. I was thinking about just how it's probably not at all a coincidence that this young woman, young artist, young creator was working on this and thinking about the idea of honoring her grandmother and being protected by her and thinking about what we carry with us was already happening. And that at the same time, this curatorial theme is being discussed for Sharjah. And that's the theme around how all of the work unfolds. It feels very fortuitous. And just you meeting this young woman in Marseille and encountering her work predates the Sharjah Commission, right? That's also something that I found pretty spot on, that sense that things are always unfolding in a way that actually makes a lot of sense. And you can find these connections in so many different ways, from people to place to time. I just love to hear you share that because that's what it brought up for me. For folks who will enter the space where your film is being shown and who may or may not be encountering your work for the first time, you ended that last question on the note of you hope that's what people gather all of what's taking place for this young woman in the presentation, in the film, and in what she's doing, right? Like what kind of space she's holding for herself and for her grandmother. How would you describe maybe some of the possible points of entry or the places with which one can maybe approach the work or think, be led to the work and to understanding it more deeply? Because I think one enters a space, encounters a film, and if you have no point of reference, like just potentially assuming that there is a blank slate there of coming to something with no knowledge so that your mind is completely open to what it could be.
What I would say is there are lots of things happening in the work that could easily be missed. But the first thing is this seven screen and Dorothy moving in and out of them. And the backdrop of the work is the water in Marseille. And then you've got this sort of refrain, spirit, the light of the world, which is a hymn that just a couple hours before meeting Dorothea, I met with another gentleman who was singing that song, Spirit, the light of the world. Yeah, he did a better job than me. And I was holding that thought because the exact hymn, I think, is Jesus, the light of the world. But he's changed. He's taken Jesus out and just put Spirit, the light of the world. And I just remember just holding that, and that sort of refrain just staying with me. Spirit's the light of the world. So in watching Dorothée move, she was dancing to no music, and I had no music. But the backdrop that was playing was the sea and this sort of refrain in my head, Spirit, the light of the world. So the work, you'd hear that throughout her dancing with a score, and then interspersed with a poem. But I think for me is, the question is like, what we carry in us, if, only if, we sit with it and listen to the other, there is a moment that leads to some level of transformation, that we can be transformed by the things that we carry. Like, we carry our histories with us, right? And often I feel like Black folks are not allowed, they're not allowed the privilege sometimes to be sat with. And I think I want everyone to sit with Dorothée and hope that she could map some sort of route for the viewer or the listener, and hopefully they'll be transformed by it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a Fred Moulton quote or he got it
The
from
brilliant.
yeah, but I think he got it from someone. But this is in a lecture. I think he said it and I wrote it down. And he says something like, we are sent in history. We send, history comes for us to send us to history. And to ourselves, we come as history to history. And I think that idea of we're sent in history, we send history, we come from history to history and to ourselves. I feel like when we sit with the other, that happens. There's this like layering of timeline that happens if we can listen to the other, hear the perspective, see them, listen to them. Like, something transforms in you that then changes your sort of future movement, which then affects someone else's history. And we can be kinder to others, and we can move with intention towards the other.
So, as we round out the episode, I just want to ask, what do you think about the curatorial theme to carry, and how you've spoken about how it's being investigated in this piece through this work, but what does it mean to you?
To carry, I think for me, is how we stand witness to others. And I'm saying others in the sense of things that we carry with us is a testament of our lives lived, and how our lives can be a witness. So in most of the works that I saw in Sharjah, but also this sort of idea of we carry each other, we carry ourselves, and we carry history, and we're carrying people, and people carry us. I think I see that as a witness of where we're at now. How can I use that idea of carrying someone or carrying someone else or carrying others to pay witness, to move us from now into another place? I find that sort of music or art, I guess, in general, does that. I guess if you sit with art that resonate with you, it does this thing where there's a shift that happens to your body. In the curatorial theme, the works that did that for me were the works that sort of carried me into a different place, that, like, in a way, they offered a shift in the body for me. That's what came to mind. And that's why I presented the work, because I was thinking, who am I carrying with me, and what am I carrying with me into this sort of project?
Julian Knxx, thank you so much for joining me on an episode. I'm really glad that we got a chance to talk more about your work today. For all of the folks listening in, if you have the opportunity to see Julian's newly commissioned work, Daughters at the Rim of the Silver Seas, on view now in the Sharjah Biennial 16 until mid-June, definitely take an opportunity to go see the work. It's a really beautiful and transformative work.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was my episode with Julian Knxx. I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Julian for joining me on the show. Thank you for tuning in to this capsule season of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. These episodes were recorded both on site and remotely during the opening week and after the opening of the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial. During the episodes, you will hear the sights and sounds of the local environment from the various sites across the Emirate of Sharjah where the biennial takes place. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and I'll see you next time. Stay tuned for my next episode. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love to all.